Alright, so today I will go over and explain the insanity of the Okita versus Susanoo fight in Record of Ragnarok. Now this fight is just insane, and it's filled with so many mind-blowing moments that you could never be certain who would be able to come out on top. But let me just say that the finale of this fight will leave you stunned, so be sure to stick to the end to not miss it. Anyway, with that said, please leave a like and a comment on this video and grab your favorite snacks. And with that out of the way, let's get right into it. Alright, so we see the commentators saying that the preparation for the 10th fight of gods versus humans is finished and that the arena has been completely renovated. He continues saying that taking into account the lessons learned after the 9th round where a large number of spectators were injured, the arena has now been completed with special specifications. As requested by the fighter on the god's side, the stage for the 10th round is a perfect recreation of a portion of Kyoto, Japan at the end of the Edo period. The crowd hears this and is a little caught off guard as they wonder if this is a request from the gods as it's set on a human side's stage. Anyway, the commentators continues and says that the gods have 5 wins and 4 losses, and that the count down to the extinction of humanity is only at 2, telling them all that humanity is literally at the edge of a cliff right now, and to push them off this cliff, the greatest sword god in the heavens is beginning to make his entrance as we see him walking on the bridge while smiling. It is said that in ancient times this god struck down the 8-headed serpent Yamata no Uorochi with his Totsuka no Tsurugi, which is a sword of the 10 handbreadths, saying that Kenjutsu, which means swordsmanship, was born at that moment, and then a sword was born from Orochi's tail, a legendary sacred treasure which is called Amenomura Kumo no Tsurugi, which is the heavenly sword of gathering clouds. And with that sword in his hands, he was furious like a storm, swifty like lightning, and he ended up cutting down the evil gods of Takamagahara, the high plane of heaven, saying that he is a sword god feared as the wild god, and now is his time to live up for his reputation. We then see him continuing to walk down the bridge, while the commentator calls him the strongest godslayer Susanoo no mikoto. He finally arrived in the Kyoto village, and is able to look around while looking happy and saying that this is the Bakumatsu. He closes his eyes and breathes in before saying that he is hyped. But just then, the commentator starts again and is going to announce the mankind's challenger to the strongest godslayer in the heavens, and we see a man walking towards Susanoo with an insane amount of aura. The commentator says that there was an era in Japanese history when the men were intense and were overflowing with fighting spirit, swords and ideas clashes, and many lives were lost in that place. It was Kyoto at the end of the Edo period, and in this city where countless swordsmen and masters were born, the peak of Kenjutsu was reached with the art of manslaying. Now who's the strongest manslayer of that era, you may ask? Would it be the man who was Japan's #1 small sword, who created many unruly ronin, Sasaki Tadasadaburo, from the Mimawa Rigumi? No, it's not him. Well, would it be him who was called the strongest tyrant of the end of the Edo period, and who mastered Shinto Munen Ryu, the founder and leader of the Shinsengumi, the director Garal Serizawa Kamo? But no, it's not him either. Then just maybe would it be the 4 manslayers of Bakumatsu who turned said era with their killing swords, Okada Izu, Tanak Shinbei, Kawakami Gensai, and Nakamura Hanjiru. But you guessed it, it's none of those either, and instead, it's this small man, dressed in a light blue checkered haori, who was feared by warriors as a demon. That sword dyed Kyoto and Osaka in fear and blood during the Bakumatsu era. Many people have questioned about his identity, and if he is a human or even a demon, but one thing which is certain is that he's history's strongest manslayer, the captain of the first unit of the Shinsengumi, and he is none other than Okita Souji, and he looks so insanely cool with his sword out. They are standing in front of each other, and Okita looks down at his sword, while saying that he missed this town a lot, and that even the blood smells the same. The commentators then asks, who will come out victorious between the strongest manslayer and the strongest godslayer in history? And then the bell rings, which symbolizes the start of the fight. Okita looks ready to fight, but Susanoo looks away and just asks Okita if he is Okita. Okita says that he is with a surprised tone. He then asks if the store to their right is the Ikedaya store, and Okita says that it is, and then out of nowhere rushes towards the store and says that this is where the Shinsengumi with only 4 men cut their way to victory against over 20 members of the Choshu and Tosa loyalist samurai. He even notices the sword marks on the shop. Okita says that Susanoo seems to know a lot about it, and Susanoo says that he does, explaining that the Bakumatsu period was his one and only dreamland. Okita asks if this place is dear to Susanoo, and he says that it is because the sword he created was cultivated by mankind over a long period history, and in this Bakumatsu period, they mastered the art of manslaying. which is just why he's been waiting for so long to get a chance to fight against the strongest manslayer. Okita is a bit confused and says that this wasn't what he expected from the God of Swords. But then suddenly from the spectators' arena, he hears someone scream his name and telling him to wake up. We see two people arguing between them before a big guy smashes their heads together. Everyone around them are wondering who they are. But Okita just laughs and says that they are the same noisy fellas as always. We then get a big panel of all of them where they introduce themselves as the Shinsengumi. We see someone called Nagakura asking if Okita's body is fit to fight, but the big guy tells him to not fear. We then get to know all of their names, but I will forget them anyway, so there is no need to read them. However, after that, the big guy says that Okita is stronger than anyone else. Okita then looks at his sword and says that he now has a healthy body, alongside the nostalgic heir and the strongest opponent before him. Because of this, he starts to look manic, while saying that finally, he can fight to the death with all of his heart. The spectators are looking at Okita and sees that his eyes are red, which is a bit scary, they say. However, his men says that it looks like Okita is going to go full force from the get-go, and another one says that it sure has been a long time since he saw a healthy Okita in action. Some other spectators are a bit worried and can't believe that he is called the strongest manslayer in the world and that all they see is a child. But the big guy just smiles as he thinks to himself that Okita will show them why he is called the strongest swordsman of the Bakumatsu, and just then, he dashes towards Susanoo with an insane speed. We see Ares for a quick second as he says that Okita is looking down at the gods too much and that this will be over in a second. However, when we get back into the fight and they enter each other's range, Okita suddenly disappears, which leaves everyone shocked. Susanoo quickly reacts, however, and sees Okita on his side, and just in time manages to jump away from the incoming sword attack. Okita falls down to the ground, but just as he touches the floor, he disappears once again and appears right ahead of Susanoo, who manages to block just in time while starting to laugh a bit. Okita is pressing down Susanoo's sword, but Susanoo just says that Okita is even swifter than what he had imagined and that he lacked even the slightest chance to retreat. He pushes away Okita and is about to kick him, but Okita swiftly jumps up and avoids it, and he instead puts his own foot on Susanoo's leg and starts to go in for a cut towards the head, but luckily, Susanoo is able to go into some weird split position and block it. While staring at each other, Susanoo says that it's to be expected and that this is truly the Tennen Rishin style, which is the strongest sword style for true combat. Anyway, he's able to get Okita off himself, and Okita flies and lands on a shop roof. While looking up, he looks like he's really enjoying it, as he is even saying that it's fun. And then he starts to jump between the rooftops, trying to find a spot where he can attack from. Susanoo is following Okita closely, but Okita manages to sneak up and tries to get in an attack which Susanoo just barely manages to avoid, as Okita lands on the ground. Susanoo tries to give back and is about to attack Okita, when suddenly Okita starts to swiftly move around Susanoo in circles. He tries to get in an attack, which Susanoo avoids, but then Susanoo agrees with Okita's earlier statement and says that it's really fun. Ares is amazed at how Okita can be so fast, but Hermes says that it isn't just speed, but in the briefest of moments that blade still carries enough power to slice an opponent in half. Zeus just laughs while saying that Okita really has a murderous instinct. After that, we get a bit of a deep dive into Okita's character, as it says that with red eyes that appear when Okita reaches the peak of excitement, he becomes the demon child, and those eyes burning bright red are proof of his life force burning up quickly by having his heart pump 3 times more blood than normal. All the muscle cells in his entire body are awakened, which allows him to utilize superhuman abilities. And then we get back into the fight and sees Okita gripping his sword extremely hard while going in for another attack, which actually manages to cut a bit of Susanoo's clothing. But as Okita comes to the ground, Susanoo sees that something isn't right, and the other spectator says that this is Okita's special move. He says that it's time to go as he tries to stab Susanoo, who blocks it, but Okita doesn't stop as he goes in for a second one. And then when that one got blocked, he went in a third time at the same spot, which manages to push Susanoo away. It was Okita's 3-stage thrust Tennen Rishin style secret technique. The commentator is super hyped as he says that Okita's insane attack was just barely stopped by Susanoo. Even his followers are saying that they believed that the attack would end Susanoo, which proves how strong it is. Susanoo has a nervous smile on himself as he compliments Okita's attack. Ares is worried, as the sound of the attack sounded whirring, and asked if his divine weapon broke. However, Susanoo says what Okita destroyed was only the scabbard, and then we finally get to see how Susanoo's sword looks like. One of the spectators says that it's really a gorgeous sword, and that it's one of the strongest divine weapons in Valhalla, which is none other than the Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi. We see some other people spectating who says that Susanoo's sword looks completely different to how it's supposed to look. But we then get to the people who made the sword, who looks at it with a pride look. We then see a mysterious girl laughing, and it's Kaniegoshin, the goddess of smelting, who says that it's understandable, as after all the legendary blade was melted down and returned to smelting iron. After that, the god of flames and smithing Hephaestus says that by combining the gods and humanity's best smiths, and then with both their essence and all of their skills, they managed to create the ultimate sword. The commentator says that this is unbelievable, as the sword Susanoo is now wielding was born from the union of humanity and the gods. Susanoo looks proudly at his sword and says that it's absolutely stunning, and that he had hoped for a grand debut with a bit more pomp and circumstance, but that this will have to work. Okita laughs and says that it's a really nice sword. Susanoo gets excited hearing that, and says that it's truly no match for it, saying that across all the planes and heavens through the annals of history, this is truly the greatest Owazamono, and Susanoo calls it the Onikiri Ame no Murakumo. He continues, and saying that for the day to finally use this to come, he can't think of a blade no more fitting for slaying the demon child. We then see Kojiro and his friends looking amazed at the sword. The girl next to them says that for humanity and the gods to combine their power and turn a greatsword into a katana is definitely not normal, even to just try and make a divine weapon even stronger, ending it by saying that it seems that Lord Susanoo was a lot more weird than she could have guessed. After that, Susanoo gets a bit serious as he says that he must have a fight worthy enough not to shame this blade. The text then says that the sword god took up a stance for the first time in this deathmatch, and it was an unbelievably ordinary Seigen stance. Everyone in the spectator stance is saying that he is using the wrong stance, and that they would have chosen something better. However, they couldn't be more wrong, as the text says that while all the swordsmen watching in the audience were in an upset. The first to notice that something was amiss was of course Okita, who looks at Susanoo in shock. But right then, all of the warriors of the Bakumatsu, as well as the legends of the Sengoku era, they all noticed how truly tremendous Susanoo's stance were. It's beginning to create some sort of dark aura around Susanoo, as he says that if it is Okita, then he believes that he is also able to see it. Now what is it that Okita is able to see? Well, it's a version of Susanoo's sword stance that none other can see, and Susanoo calls it the Shinra, Yaorozu, all gods in the heavens. Susanoo explains that as he is wielding this blade now, it's his everything. And then he screams at Okita to let him see his everything as well. After that we get a bit sidetracked, however, it's in the middle of the Okita versus Susanoo fight, so I will of course cover it, and the text says that the primordial gods are gods who were born from the chaos of the beginning. They are the origin of the universe, the beginning of all creation, who once ruled the entire world. But even then, the power of the primordial gods was so massive that they self-destructed, and it's said that they returned to the beginning of chaos. And then we see Odin standing in front of both Buddha and Beelzebub. Buddha is surprised to learn about the resurrection of the primordial gods. And then Odin's crow starts to talk, as one says that the primordial gods of Aki are just legends, and the other one calls them completely delusional, and asks them why Lord Odin would wish for such a thing. They continues and says that there were ancient gods who once named themselves primordials, and if they were to assume those primordial gods even exist, both the heavens and the human world would have been annihilated. Beelzebub says that the primordial gods just being a myth was something he used to believe in, however it was, until he found a forbidden book. He explains that when researching about Satan, he just happened to find it in the back of the library of the underworld. He found the Book of Gornir, which describes the resurrection of the primordial gods, which means that the primordial gods really existed at some point, and someone knows how to resurrect them. And it also means that those who forbid said thing also exist. He continues and says that unfortunately, most of that forbidden book was rotting away, and that most of the passages were illegible. However, he found a passage inside which said that when the world tree absorbs the water of life, Odin of the twin eyes will offer his own body, and the world will return to its primordial state. Both Buddha and the crows are completely in shock. Beelzebub says that it was a long time since he read it, so it took him a while to connect the dots, and he may even be delusional to think that the content is about resurrection of the primordial gods. However, he asks Odin if that forbidden book with his own name written on it isn't the answer to his long-cherished wish. A dark and scary aura starts to form around Odin, and he laughs like a psychopath as he says that he is the Lord of Madness and that he is the Lord of Rage. Then he snaps back into reality and calls them all a bunch of idiots and starts to swing his sword to attack. But just as Beelzebub and Buddha is getting ready to face Odin, some lightning starts to appear around him. It's none other than Thor who starts to walk towards them and asks what they are doing here, and he goes and stands between the three of them. Odin tells Thor to get out of his way, but Thor just smiles. Buddha then asks Thor if he's come to help Odin, but Thor says that he isn't here to help anyone, but is here to just say one thing. He thinks back to the warriors who have died, and says that the pride of the warriors who fought in that arena, he won't allow it to be tarnished by anyone, and he says it with a real menacing tone. He says that until this Ragnarok is finished, life and death will be decided on the arena. That is the courtesy that they as warriors must show to their fallen enemies. Buddha says that he's never heard that before, but says that he understands. Thor then takes his hammer towards Odin and asks if that isn't right. We can see that Odin is angry, but says that until Ragnarok is finished, he will stay put, and is beginning to walk away with Thor. But Beelzebub isn't having it, as he says that their story isn't over yet, and says that he will make Odin listen even if he has to use force. But then suddenly Adamus comes and says that it's enough. Kintoki also comes and asks Buddha if anything is wrong. Beelzebub looks extremely angry and tells Adamus not to get in his way, and that if he does, then he will erase him. Adamus tells him not to tarnish the godly dignity that Hades has shown, saying that it was Beelzebub himself that told him that, and it creates a stalemate between them. Before Beelzebub agrees to back down for now, Odin and Thor starts to walk off again, and Kintoki says that Buddha never stops moving. But as Odin walks past Kintoki, both of them looks angry at each other. Buddha says that Kintoki came at a good timing, and Kintoki asks what's up with Odin, and asks joking if he was scared of Kintoki since he was glaring at him so much. Buddha says that it might be because he told Odin that Kintoki was exploring Tartarus, and Kintoki asks Buddha why in the world he would tell Odin that. Anyway, Kintoki says that he is done with the underworld for now. Buddha asks how things are down there, and Kintoki says that it wasn't good, saying that the gods of Tartarus are demonically though, and because of that, he's never going to be able to break in and make contact with that prisoner god. This only gets Buddha more excited to visit Siegfried now. Anyway, Buddha and Kintoki are starting to walk away, but before they can, Beelzebub asks Buddha if he doesn't hate Beelzebub, explaining that it was him after all who planted that Hajin seed in Zerofuku, and saying that Buddha must hate him so much that he would want to tear Beelzebub apart. Buddha is quiet for a second, before asking if that's the case, and then he goes back to Beelzebub in an instant. He starts to look extremely angry, and Kintoki and Adamus are worried, but Buddha just pulls out some sort of stick and hits Beelzebub with it. Buddha explains that Zero was the one who taught him that it is inevitable that hatred will rise in the heart. But if he allows his hatred to get the better of him, then it will be the same as betraying Zero, saying that they will walk the path of light together, and that's what he promised to Zero, which is the reason why Buddha doesn't hate Beelzebub. Beelzebub looks at the ground before saying that Buddha is a very complicated guy in the end, and starts to walk away, while saying that if someday Buddha feels like it, then he can come and kill him, and that Buddha would probably be able to do it. Buddha just laughs weirdly about that, but with that, we leave them all and go back to the Valhalla arena and see that the audience has been engulfed in a strange silence. And then in the arena, we see Okita and Susanoo going back and forth trading attacks with one another. Susanoo is able to deflect Okita and send him to a wall, however Okita lands on top of it and dashes back towards Susanoo. He attacks but misses and then goes for one of his attacks, the Ryubiken Dragon Tail Sword, which Susanoo blocks, creating an insane showdown. And after that, everyone in the spectating arena stands up and is extremely hyped for this insane fight. They say that they have no idea about what's going on, but that they know that it's an amazing sword fight and that the demon child and Susanoo are fighting to the death. The commentator says that Susanoo's Shinra Yaoyorozu allows Okita's sword strikers to wield a godly speed. And on top of that, Okita reacts and counterattacks to all of Susanoo's blows. We see Ares being transformed into stone by how insane this fight is. Hermes says that he doesn't want to get distracted even if it's for an instant, and Zeus just says that swords are cool, but what he really likes are fists. We then see Anubis, who I just love, but we see him spectating from afar saying that he can barely wait, and that this is just so amazing. Kojiro says that Susanoo has mastered all sword techniques and all schools created by mankind throughout history. He can comprehend all of them and perhaps has reached the peak of all those styles. He says that he can't get enough of it, but asks Okita to show them how he can win against that god. Now in the battle arena, Susanoo compliments Okita's attack, and Okita compliments him back before having a big smile and saying that this is so much fun. The warriors in the spectating arena says that Okita is really enjoying himself, but another one says that if he loses concentration even for a moment, he'll die instantly. The big guy then says that he doubts that he's even afraid of death at this point, as every day was a battle and death was always next to him, saying that for the Shinsengumi, they fight to the death every day of their life. Back in the fight, Susanoo says that Okita is laughing, which shows that he is the one and only Okita Souji. But then suddenly something happens as Okita lowers his stance. Kojiro's buddy asks if it's the formless stance of the Yagu Shinkaje Ryu, However, Kojiro says that it's similar but not correct, and saying that it's possible not a form learned somewhere else, explaining that to survive the hell of the Bakumatsu period, he naturally acquired that through fighting to the death with many samurais of the period. Back in the fight, Okita starts to almost float towards Susanoo, and in his eyes he almost looks tired, and then out of nowhere he strikes an attack against Susanoo. Susanoo says that he couldn't even see what just happened. He throws another one and another one after that, both catching Susanoo off guard, while Okita is going in for another one. Kojiro says that Okita has one thing which surpasses that god, which is his countless near-death experiences, and just then he goes in for another attack, but this time he gets Susanoo with the end of the sword. Susanoo realizes it too late, and Okita then flips it and cuts Susanoo's body, making the first real hit of the match, and we can see that it really took a lot on Susanoo, as he was brought down to his knees, while Okita is standing in front of him with a smug expression as he swiped away some of the blood from his sword, and he then lets out a cute smile. The warriors are super excited by this, but they also say that it's to be expected as it's Okita after all. Kojiro's buddy says that formless yet a deadly aura that while at the same time lacks killing intent, saying that this is a realm that can only be reached by swordsmen who have crossed countless life and death situations. Kojiro agrees and says that it's why his sword is so sharp, as it's precisely because the battlefield was his daily life. We then get to see Gaul, who says that to be able to land even a single blow on the sword god in a sword duel is an awesome feat. However, Brunhilde says that it's too early to celebrate, and that the god who knows about the greatness of humanity better than anyone else is none other than Susanoo. We then see Susanoo getting up on his feet again as he says that he is hyped, but we then get into a little flashback as the text says that Susanoo is the founder of the sword but not the founder of swordsmanship. After that, we get all the way to ancient Japan, where the text says that from birth, Susanoo was perfect and flawless, and that he was the highest-ranking noble god in the Japanese mythology. And as it was requested, he cut down all the evil gods and evil spirits with a single slash of his sword. Even though he was revered as the sword god and the strongest godslayer, his soul hung in a state of tranquility, as he was bored of the fighting, as it was too easy for him. However, one day the creator god, Izanagi, gave orders to the three noble gods he created. Amaterasu was ordered to rule over the heavens, Tsukuyomi was ordered to rule over the ocean, and Susanoo was ordered to rule over the earth, which he followed. Descending to Izumo to rule the earth, Susanoo exterminated the rampaging monsters and traveled throughout the land, and to fulfill his divine mission, he simply wielded his sword. But then, many years later, Susanoo happened to visit a village, and he witnessed a scene that would shape his divine life, and we then see some sort of monster standing in front of two children. The monster with a smug expression asks them what's up with their scary glare, as he is telling them to give more value to their life, telling the boy to leave the girl and that the monster is planning to sell her as a slave. The older brother ensures his sister that he will protect her and that it's alright. We then see Susanoo watching from afar and compliments the boy. The text then says that there was an overwhelming difference in power and that the outcome was clear. Or was it? Because when the monster rushes towards the boy, he surprisingly blocked the attack with his sword while being a lot smaller. He then moves away his sword, which makes the monster fall down, and he then gets in a clean hit on the monster's face, which completely knocks the monster out. The text says that parrying the opponent's sword, he stepped forward and struck. This was the fundamental principle of swordsmanship for humans. However, it was something Susanoo had never seen before, so he rushes over to the boy and asks him what that just was. He starts to overwhelm the boy with questions, but the boy just says that what he did was called sword, saying that even with his small body, he can fight big opponent like this with this sword, explaining that in their village, they have come up with all sorts of ways to use a sword, and that they always train together using them. Susanoo is surprised that everyone is using the so-called sword. The boy even explains that in their village they have a mural of the god Susanoo, which is a bit funny. Anyway, the boy explains that Susanoo saved mankind a long time ago, and that they say that Lord Susanoo defeated a monster much bigger than himself, with just one sword. Susanoo is beginning to almost cry, as he knows that it's him that the boy is talking about. The boy smiles brightly and says that he needs to practice more with the sword so that he can become just like Susanoo one day, and Susanoo is just so happy. After that, the text down below says that to the gods in Susanoo, the sword was nothing more than a tool imbued with divine power to swing down opponents and slash them into pieces. Nevertheless, beings he assumed to be far smaller and weaker than a god created the art of slaying stronger opponents using the sword. Susanoo gets down to the ground and says that he is ashamed of himself and asks himself what the difference is between his sword and the swords of these people. He starts to almost freak out and scaring the boy and the girl before he gets up and saying that this is it. This is the Kenjutsu swordsmanship, also called the art of the sword. Then out of nowhere, Susanoo gets down to the ground bowing to them. He says that them humans are truly amazing and begs them to please teach Susanoo swordsmanship too, and he says it with such a big and happy face. This also made Susanoo into the first god to seek guidance from humans. After that we get to the temple of Amaterasu, where she asks Susanoo if he has lost his mind as he told her about the story. He says that he hasn't, and explains that it's not sword, but instead swordsmanship, and both Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi looks at him in shock. And if that wasn't enough, then Tsukuyomi asks Susanoo what's up with his new fake dialect, and asks him if he is looking down to him and their sister by talking like humans, but Amaterasu tells him to calm down. Tsukuyomi clears his throat, but says that a god who is one of the three noble gods would never seek aid from lowly humans, and asks if Susanoo really thought that it would be allowed. Susanoo takes a deep breath and says that he didn't think that they would allow it, but in that case he is resigning from the three noble gods. Both Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu looks like they have seen a ghost, and Tsukuyomi asks him if he has lost his mind. Amaterasu, on the other hand, asks him why he is so obsessed with this swordsmanship thing, and he explains that he is just really hyped, saying that even though he was born as one of the three noble gods, the power to be called the sword god, the adoration of the common people, those are all things he's had since the beginning. However, human swordsmanship is different, as only those who lack these things can truly appreciate them and the value of what they have earned through hard work and mutual refinement. He explains that swordsmanship is endless, and he then gets a big smile, saying that once you've experienced something so interesting, you can't just stop, and says that for the first time in his life, his heart is boiling. Tsukuyomi is continuing and saying that this doesn't make sense. However, Amaterasu on the other hand says alright, and that Susanoo can do as he likes. However, asking humans to teach him something is a shameless act for a god, and because of that, she will never allow him to set foot in Takamagahara ever again, and ends it by saying that she now sentenced Susanoo to eternal exile. Tsukuyomi looks shocked, and Susanoo's face gets dark before he bows down and says that they have an agreement. Then Amaterasu says that there is one more thing, and that it's regarding the dignity of other gods, as she won't allow Susanoo to receive direct instruction from humans or expose himself to them, and that she will only allow him to learn, and asks if that's fine. Susanoo starts to smile and thanks her, and just like that, Susanoo was exiled forever. However, from that point on, Susanoo traveled around and around, hiding his identity. Swordsmanship continued to deepen with humanity for more than 1,000 years. The swordsmanship that swordmasters have poured their lives into creating. He relentlessly studied and absorbed the principles of that art to the fullest, and only seeking for the moments when his heart boils. After that, we get back to the fight where we see Susanoo and Okita. Susanoo tells Okita that in Kyoto of Bakumatsu he saw it. Politics, thoughts, and in everything that they did or said, swordsmanship was at the center of everything, saying that it's really the best moment. Okita smiles and says that Susanoo really seems to enjoy swordsmanship. Susanoo says that he does, but admits that he never thought that the day would come when he would fight to the death with Okita like this. But that's also exactly why he would like to thank Okita, as just now he wants to make Okita boil, and then he drags his sword back and is ready to go in for an attack again. With both of them getting fired up again, and the text says that shrouded in an extraordinary sword aura, the onigiri am no murakumo, and the stance of the sword god wielding that extraordinary sacred treasure truly are uncommon and bizarre, and we see Susanoo looking like a completely beast as he has steam coming off him. The commentator is even shocked as he asks what in the world Susanoo's stance is. However, Susanoo on the other hand asks Okita if it isn't super cool and says that it's his ace up his sleeve. Okita takes a step and thinks that he's being overwhelmed by such an amazing sword aura. The spectator says that Susanoo's stance looks like the very image of Susanoo as depicted in the cotton paintings passed down through mythology. Kojiro, while looking at this closely, asks if this is a one-hit kill stance from the moment Okita enters his fighting range. His friend says that he's never seen a stance like that in any school. Although the essence of that technique seems similar to one thing he has seen before, which is the still-in-place stance, which is a way of fighting where the moment your opponent is approaching you cut them down, a fighting style whose strength is the defense. We then see Tsukuyomi saying that Susanoo's stance is vulgar, as it's a technique that was developed and honed alongside humanity, and that just the thought of this is enough to make him shudder. Amaterasu says that this is going to be a sight to behold, as she calls Susanoo's secret technique amazing. And we then see Izanagi asking Susanoo what he is going to do about Okita. We then get to Okita, who says that it's an interesting stance, and that once Okita is in his striking range, Susanoo will cut him in half. However, Okita is determined not to let Susanoo lay a single finger on him, and Susanoo just cocky says that they will see about that. Then Okita starts to charge right into Susanoo, but just as he is getting close to Susanoo's range, he starts toying with Susanoo as he is constantly moving in and out of Susanoo's striking range, saying that this is a strategy to avoid being targeted by Susanoo and wait for an opportunity to strike him. However, as Okita is moving around, he is amazed because just by looking at this technique, he can see that there are no openings for him to strike in. Susanoo smiles and says that it's as expected by Okita as he says that he is fearlessly approaching. But against this stance, any attempt to read distance is useless. But just then, Okita gets a bit too close into the range and is getting ready for Susanoo's attack. Susanoo swings his sword and asks if Okita is ready to go, but Okita is trying to move as far back as he can. But just then, the swing from Susanoo's sword comes flying at him, and even though he blocked it, Okita was still sent flying away. Susanoo takes a deep breath, and we see that his technique was called Reverse Heavenly Demon. Susanoo's swing is destroying houses left and right, and it creates an explosion, and the crowd can't believe it, and all of Okita's warriors are worried to death. But just then, as the smoke goes away, we can see Okita on the ground, but as he looks back, he is in shock as the whole city of Kyoto has been cleaved through by Susanoo's slash. This gets the crowd excited, and Kojiro says that it was only Susanoo's swing that did this, which leaves the girl completely in shock. Kojiro explains that with tremendous speed and force, the sword was swung, tearing through the air and creating a vacuum sword at the tip of the sword, and saying that it's like his sword stretched out, exceeding its natural range. He managed to slice through Okita and the streets of Kyoto. The girl is amazed and asks if it's possible to do such a thing when you master the sword. Kojiro says that he wishes that it was that easy, but explains that the blow was only possible because of Susanoo. Perhaps for them humans, it would take more than 1,000 years to master it, and says that for Susanoo to have mastered it, it must have taken a deep love for the sword, and the sword's love in return. In order to achieve such a feat, Susanoo says that Okita managed to react to his attack on his first try, saying that Okita rolled sideways to deflect the vacuum blade, because if Okita had tried to block it directly, then he would have been cleaved in half. Okita, however, is in his own mind, and says that if he had been even a moment slower to react, he would have been undoubtedly cut into pieces. Susanoo asks him what's the matter, and asks if the demon child is afraid now. All of a sudden, Okita laughs a bit, and apologizes for that, but explains that the sound of his racing heart is surprisingly pleasant. Susanoo is a bit confused, but Okita continues and says that he is glad that he accepted this fight to the death, as thanks to Susanoo, it feels like he is burning more and more. We can see that his organs are beginning to pump out more blood as his eyes start to glow redder than usual, and the spectator says that right now he looks like a demon. Okita starts to jump up and down, while Susanoo gets into position and says that he is surprised to think that there was something beyond the demon child, and he says that he is pumped, while Okita looks completely insane as he tells Susanoo that he will break him, as this is the true sword demon within. Everyone is commenting on Okita's face as they say that he looks like a real demon, and even him himself agrees with them as he looks completely wild. And after that he starts to jump high up into the air and says that he thinks that he can do this now. Susanoo is getting ready, and as Okita reaches the ground again, he completely charges towards Susanoo with an insane speed. Ares, who is spectating, calls Okita a fool, as he says that he will definitely be cleaved in half this time. Okita gets into Susanoo's range, but just as he swings his blade back, Okita jumps away back. However, as Susanoo's swing is coming closer to Okita, he jumps up and insanely cuts it in half, which is mind-blowing, and he is using that as a distraction as he gets back on the ground and right away rushes towards Susanoo. Now that he has attacked, Susanoo manages to just in time block Okita's blade. They enter a stalemate with each other, and Susanoo asks Okita if it wasn't a bit reckless to attempt to clash with his swing earlier on. Okita, whose eyes are glowing even more now, says that the next time he will do even better. Both of them are trying to push each other away, but none of them are able to do it. Susanoo notes that both Okita's speed and power have increased drastically. He compliments Okita and says that he is doing great before he finally pushes him away, but just as Okita lands, he is back charging against Susanoo once again, and their blade once again collide with each other. Ares, looking at this, is amazed at how he took Susanoo's attack head-on and was still able to fight. However, Hermes asks him if he wasn't able to see it, and that the moment Susanoo's attack was released, Okita, who had been charging forward, took a step back to keep some distance, also saying that it seems that the vacuum blade created by Susanoo's sword weakened the further it travels. Okita determined the distance for a counterattack within the range of the attack, and with this, he was able to deflect the vacuum blade. However, Ares asks if the vacuum blade isn't invisible, but Hermes says that it might be for Ares. However, Okita should be able to see it, saying that the movement the air caused by the approaching vacuum, the gaps in the dust clouds, and perhaps even the slight refraction of light caused by the change of air density. Ares can't believe how they are able to see that far, and Zeus just laughs while saying that, in order to prevent Susanoo from building up the power needed for that technique, Okita closed the distance between them instantly, saying that it's expected from the strongest in combat and that he is living up to his hype. We then get back into the fight where Susanoo tries to attack, but Okita dodges just in time. Both laughs a bit before Okita starts to move around Susanoo at an insane speed. The warriors are amazed and asks what those movements are, and also saying that Okita is on a completely new level. The big guy, however, says that in the world of living, since his body was ravaged by his disease, Okita wasn't able to bring forth even half of Onigo's power, meaning that, in other words, this is the real Okita Souji. Susanoo thinks that Okita wants to attack his blind spot, but then Okita gets down to the ground and he looks like an absolutely monster as he is standing in front of Susanoo. But Okita starts to smile and uses his Tennen Rishin Ryu Demon Claw thrust and kinda leaps forward with his sword and manages to slash Susanoo's chest. The crowd is going wild after this, as thanks to Okita's evolution, they have found some new excitement. Anyway, Okita looks back towards Susanoo, and he sees Susanoo pointing his left hand against Okita, and thanks to Okita's attack, he couldn't move out of the way that fast, and Susanoo knows this, so he uses his wind attack again. Okita is starting to panic, saying that Susanoo is fast, and that it's too late for him to escape. He knew that the divine blow couldn't be dodged, so instead, Okita would only be able to react to the blow with instinct. Susanoo's attack is incoming, but Okita gets close to him instead of escaping. The text says that in Kyoto during the Bakumatsu, his face was rubbed by the god of death several times, and for this time, nothing else was needed but experience, as Okita blocked Susanoo's sword. However, the wind is still coming toward him, so he takes his sword and kinda spins it around to avoid the blast, to the best of his abilities. The crowd goes nuts after that, and Susanoo says that he is boiling here, and that he is surprised that Okita managed to react to even Mugen. Okita starts to smile, and says that he himself is surprised that Susanoo can release such a powerful attack from such a small accumulation of energy. However, Susanoo says that the strength is reduced in exchange for that. However, he ensures Okita that he will finish this with the next one. Susanoo says that to be fair, he really wishes that this fight could last forever, but that it unfortunately can't. They both smile at each other, but then Okita was the first to make the move as he charges against Susanoo at an insane speed. Ares is in awe by that speed, and Hermes is wondering if he is trying to use his speed to shift the aim of his left hand to create an opening. Zeus, on the other hand, says that if that's what he is planning, then it's nothing but a reckless strategy. As while he attempts to find an opening, he is giving Susanoo time to gather power, saying that there's no way for Okita to deflect the next of Susanoo's wind attacks, and if Okita does one slip up, then he's dead. Anyway, Okita then enters the perfect spot for Susanoo as he sends away his attack. But to dodge it, Okita jumps high up into the air. However, it's getting dangerous now as Okita is in the air, which gives Susanoo the chance to send another one mid-air. He screams that this is over as he sends the second one towards Okita. Everyone spectating had a bunch of gloomy expression on their faces, while Okita alone was smiling all the way to the max. Now what does he do mid-air? Well, he sends away his sword right down towards Susanoo's foot. This makes Susanoo miss his attack. Okita then gets down to the ground right in front of him and pulls out his sword, which cuts away Susanoo's toes. Okita goes in for another slash, but Susanoo is starting to lose balance, so he falls down to the ground and has to use his sword to hold him up. Because of that, Okita knows that he can't use his sword, so he jumps up and is going to cut him. However, Susanoo then stretches out his foot against Okita, which leaves him shocked, and Susanoo then uses all of his strength to somehow hold himself in the ground while taking his sword out of the ground and against Okita, and Okita, who's still in mid-air, gets hit with an head-on blow from Susanoo, which leaves him flying up towards the sky, looking completely finished, and Susanoo gets up and says that the victory is his. We then leave the fight for a bit as we go into Okita's flashback, as he says that he's still not fulfilled his promise to Kondo. After that, we see a small Okita walking beside Kondo, who's the big guy, and Okita apologizes that he messed up the training camp once again, saying that whenever he turns into that thing, referring to Onigo and the demon child, he always loses himself, and before he knew it, he had completely messed up someone, and saying that he caused a lot of trouble for Kondo. Okita looks down at the ground when suddenly Kondo puts his hand on Okita's head and tells him not to worry about it, and that it was his decision to take Okita under his wing, even if that includes that demon child thing. Then he accepts that. Kondo smiles big, but Okita starts to cry, saying that he understands that this is not good, but in the end, he's not able to stop it, and that in the end, he's just a monstrous murderer, saying that he won't ever become a noble samurai like Kondo. After that, they start to walk, and Kondo asks Okita if he knows what samurai means. Okita says that it means the power to kill enemies. Kondo says that he isn't entirely wrong but not fully right either. Okita apologizes, but Kondo gets down to his knees and says that this is something that he has always thought, which is that staking one's life, one's own beliefs. That person can die with a smile on their face, and that's what it means to be a real samurai. Okita is surprised, but then Kondo assures him that everything is fine and takes him on his shoulders, saying that one day he will understand. As they are walking, Okita asks Kondo if a monster like him can ever become a true samurai who fights with conviction. Kondo asks him why he's complaining so much, and saying that at times like this you should just say that he will do it. Then Okita lights up and says that he will become one. They both say that it's a promise as they fist bumps each other. Anyway, with that we are back in the match, and we see Susanoo standing up strong while Okita is lying lifeless on the ground. But then Susanoo laughs and gets down on the ground, as well as saying that he is boiling here. The god's side begins to celebrate, but Okita's warriors are super worried as they scream Okita's name. Just then, the winds blows intensely around Okita as he says Kondo's name, and that he hasn't fulfilled his promise to Kondo yet. And just like that, he's trying to get up again. Okita starts to look insane again, as he says that until he gives everything he has, he can't die. We then get back to yet another flashback, and this time the Edo period, where we see Okita swinging his sword. He looks worn out, but says that he has to be useful to Kondo and everyone else. The text says that as Okita grew older, he became the captain of the first unit of Shinsengumi. He was praised as the strongest swordsman of the Bakumatsu. However, the Boshin War, which began in the 4th year of the era, amidst the final battles, Kondo and his comrades found themselves struggling, and at the very moment when they needed his sword the most, Okita had unfortunately been confined on a bed because of a fatal disease which made him cough up blood. He still continued to swing his sword even though he was sick. He continued to train because he believed the day would come where he would fight alongside his comrades once again. Day after day, he continued to swing his sword. However, the more he swung it, the heavier the sword got. He got so frustrated so that he collapsed on the ground, but he then gripped his sword with an intense look, saying that Kondo and everyone is waiting for him. But just as he said that, he began coughing up more and more blood before he fell down to the ground, and when he opened his eyes, he was in a weird space with Onigo sitting right in front of him. The text says that Onigo, the demon child, is the most ferocious and strongest battle instinct which dwelled within Okita since birth, and as a price for his demoniac strength, it has been continuously consuming his body. Onigo looks at Okita and says that he's lost a ton of weight and asks if it's time now, saying that even when Okita fell ill, he was still waiting for his chance. Okita starts to look sad as he says that he still haven't fulfilled the promise to Kondo, but he gets interrupted by Onigo, who says that it's useless as his body is falling apart and that they won't be able to fight side by side again. Onigo leaves, and Okita starts to cry, saying that he still wants to swing his sword with everyone just once more. He sees his friends slowly walking away and asks them to stop as he doesn't want it to end. But then we get back to the fight where everyone is amazed by the fact that Okita is standing up. He looks fired up as he says that he wants to fight even more. His friends celebrate this, but they see something strange as the color of Okita's eyes are suddenly blue. Okita says that this body is not the same as it was back then, and that he can finally go all out, which is also why Onigo should be completely fine this time. Onigo tells Okita that even if they manage to beat Susanoo, Okita will end up dying. Okita just smiles and says that it's the way of the samurai. He then smiles as he takes off his robe, and we can see Onigo standing side by side with Okita as he says that they will die together. After that, Okita's eyes gets even more intense, and both him and Onigo screams that they will give everything they have, and because of that, an immense aura is starting to create around them. We also see Kondo starting to cry while seeing this, as he says that he always believed that Okita would become a true samurai. We then see Okita looking more coldly than ever as he has his sword ready. He looks intensely at Susanoo as he says that he will make his move. Susanoo firstly looks surprised but then starts to cry while saying that this is a reward descending from Takamagahara, and that all those days swinging his sword alone they are finally rewarded, saying that he dreamed of someday using the swordsmanship that he had been honing for so long. Susanoo gets up and says that he is now convinced that his divine life was meant for this very moment. Okita looks super hyped up while Susanoo is crying. However, even with tears in his eyes, he still thanks Okita for this fight. Funny enough, we get a small cameo from both Bach and Michelangelo, who calls Okita's blue aura intense and beautiful. We then get an inner monologue where Okita thanks his Valkyrie, saying that he is doing something so selfish and yet she is putting up with him. She says that Okita's selfishness is her desire and not to worry about anything, just to swing his sword to his heart's content, saying that she is the Valkyrie who follows the swordsman's soul. They lock hands, and she tells him to right now bring out everything that he has. We also learn that she is the sixth of the Valkyries called Skalmod. We then see Gaul asking if Okita and her sister will be fine, saying that while looking at them she feels so uneasy. Brunhilde explains that whether he wins or whether he loses, this will be his final battle as a swordsman, explaining that right now Okita has become completely one with Onigo. He wields a power capable of consuming his own body, and naturally Okita's body should have already broken down a long time ago, unable to withstand that power. But it's all thanks to Skalmod's ability, as the moments Okita accumulated as a swordsman and the future moments he would have experienced as a swordsman, and had he not died by his disease, then all of Okita's potential is being concentrated into this very present, saying that right now Okita is staking everything, present, past and future, on this very moment. He attained the perfect body for a swordsman, and the sixth of the Valkyries, Skalmod. The power that dwells within her rune is the Age of Sword. Anyway, now, with that yapping out of the way, let's get into the fight, as Okita tells Susanoo that he's gonna go, and then suddenly he just disappears and appears right in front of Susanoo. He uses one of his Demon Claw thrust abilities, but gets blocked just in time by Susanoo. However, when Susanoo tries to cut Okita, he just cuts the wind, as Okita has already gotten behind Susanoo and is about to strike. Susanoo looks back and attacks Okita, but as his sword reaches him, he just cuts the wind again, and as that happens, Okita appears in front of him and uses his Tiger's Tail attack, which sends Susanoo a bit back. Susanoo can't believe anything, as he says that this is not even in the same realm. As fast as whether he blocks or dodges him, another attack comes right after. He can't even counter and not even escape. It's just like he's trapped in an infinity attack by Okita. Okita continues his relentless attacks, and Susanoo screams at him to let's go. Even the commentators can't see what is happening. Anyway, we move over to Zeus, who calls them amazing. Ares is amazed at how Okita is able to surpass even his evolution. Zeus gets so excited, so he goes into his big form and says that it's impossible, as all of those consecutive strikes and those movements, they far exceed the human limit. Even Okita's friends are saying that they have never seen Okita like this. Kondo says that he can't believe it, as each strike he lands is a deadly blow from the Tenin Rishin Ryu style, and that it's essentially a sword designed for one-hit kills. But to continue to unleash that as a series of attacks, it's impossible in terms of body and mechanics. However, we then see another person in the crowd, and it's Ichimatsu, the child of the gardener where Okita lived, and he tells Okita to hang in there and not to lose. We then get into once again a flashback where the text says that even in his later years, as his illness worsened and he was no longer able to wield a sword, Okita never gave up on his swordsmanship. He looks exhausted, and Ichimatsu says that he should rest, but Okita refuses, and just then, he begins to cough up more blood. But even then, he just asked Ichimatsu to give him more ink so that he could continue. Those were the fruits of countless hours spent combining and refining over 80 techniques of the Tenin Rishin Ryu style on the battlefield, a completely new series of linked attacks, and a martial art which was devised by Okita himself, as he was determined to fight alongside Kondo and everyone else. However, born from the desperate flapping of imaginary wings while he was confined to a sickbed, they were far from reality, exceeding the limits of a human being. But for that very reason, Okita's sword transcended human logic and soared into the heavens. It was called the Kite that returns to the heavens attack. And then we see Okita jumping high up into the air and is going to strike against Susanoo with this style. As Okita uses that style, we see that Kondo is able to recognize it. He explains that the kite soars and returns to the skies. It expresses the state of all things freely enjoying themselves according to their natural inclinations, saying that this is the Chinese poem that his foster father used as the seal and inscription for the ultimate techniques in their school. He looks at Okita and says that he has finally reached the highest realm of that ultimate technique, which is a place where no one else has ever been. Anyway, back in the fight, we see Okita give attack after attack towards Susanoo, who says that he can't even catch his breath and that it feels like he's being crushed by an avalanche. But even then, Susanoo just starts to smile as he says that Okita really is the greatest. Okita moves to the side and is targeting his sword against Susanoo, while saying that it was Susanoo that led him here, also ending it by thanking him. And then he rushes in for the kill. As he leaps towards Susanoo, he starts with the first attack, then moves right away onto the second attack, and then he moves behind Susanoo and charges up his powers before going in for this third attack and finalizing the Demon Claw 3-stage thrust. Their blades meet. However, the force from Okita is so big that they move backwards. We get a close-up and sees that Susanoo's sword is beginning to break, so he lowers it and moves in the direction of Okita to kinda like switch places. The crowd is stunned and their eyes are glued to what's going on, as we see that Okita managed to pierce right through Susanoo's scared treasure and the god himself. Luckily he moved the sword to the side, which allowed to protect the most vital of organs, but even then he starts coughing up an insane amount of blood, and Okita's friends get super hyped up. Meanwhile, Izanagi, Tsukuyomi, and Amaterasu looks destroyed as they can't believe their eyes, and while everyone in the arena was certain of Okita's victory, there was one human who felt a sense of unease, and it was none other than Okita himself, who looks back and sees Susanoo missing a bit of his chest but still standing up. Susanoo looks at his bloody hand and questions if this is a real battle. He looks at both his hands and realizes that this is what swordsmanship is all about, and then he takes his hands against the sky and thanks to Okita, as because of him, Susanoo was finally able to reach it. The crowd doesn't know what is going on, as Susanoo takes his hands together and it looks like he is praying. However, the sword god raised both fists palms together towards the skies and gently grasped the hilt of his sacred treasure, the sword he thought he had lost. Slowly as usual, he assumed a formal stance, which Okita also did. But then, to everyone's surprise, as if in a child's play, Susanoo swung his invisible sword. Okita looks confused and jumps a bit to the side. But then the most insane thing happens, as the bone in his left arm and left leg, their insides break down and brings Okita to his knees. He looks up and sees Susanoo with an insane aura around himself as he says that he's reached it at last, the peak of his swordsmanship. Now what is it that he is talking about? Well, it's that he can still use a sword without having a sword in his hands. After that, there is some text that says that there is a dream yet to be fulfilled for those who have mastered martial arts. There's the peak of archery, in which there is no need to shoot with an arrow. The peak of fistfights, in which there is no need to strike with your fists. And of course, the peak of the sword, in which there is no need to use a sword to cut. All that means to kill without any weapons. After that, we see a huge rock and an old man swing with no sword against it. The text continues and asks if this dream is really out of reach, but that's not the case, as masters and experts who reached the peak of that realm did exist. After that, we see that the old man's swing actually managed to break the stone in half, but right after it says that without exceptions, those who reached said peak died at the same moment they reached that peak. That technique, that magnificent feat disappeared like dew, because they exceeded the limits of humanity, and consequently reaching the realm of the gods. After that, we get back to the match and the commentator says that the sword god's invisible sword, Musuken, destroyed the left side of Okita Souji's body, which we see as he's filled with blood while kneeling on the ground. Susanoo is standing right in front of him with a smirk on his face as he says that this is the unornamented sword, Musuken. However, we can see that his body is taking fatal damage as he's wielding this imaginary sword. However, he says that it's good and that he is only feeling pain. Okita, who's barely able to stand, is able to speak with a weak tone as he first laughs before he says that, truth to be said, he's impressed. Just when he thought that he had surpassed Susanoo, he goes and surpasses Okita right after. He grabs his sword and says that right now, he's having so much fun as he smiles with a manic facial expression. Susanoo agrees and says that the same goes for him. He continues and says that he wishes that he could fight forever. However, if he continues to swing this guy Musuken, then it seems like his very life and soul will shatter. So sadly, he won't be able to do what he wants. After that, he prepares his next attack by taking his sword back and telling Okita to end this. Okita doesn't say anything, but he doesn't really need to as he takes his sword up and puts it against Susanoo. Their aura is immense and is filling the whole stadium. Ares is amazed at Susanoo's Musuken technique as he questions what it is before saying that it seems like Okita was damaged by Susanoo, who just swung with his arms. Hermes adds in by saying that he doesn't understand the logic behind that technique, but like Heimdall said, he is swinging a sword of nothingness, a sword that can't be seen, and says that it seems like Okita's left half was destroyed internally. Ares is in shock as he doesn't quite follow, asking Hermes how such an absurd technique exists. Zeus decides to add into their little fun conversation and says that there's something that transcends the realm of reason. It can't be measured. He looks out on the field and says that there's only one thing that's certain, which is that Susanoo finally arrived there. After countless years foolishly swinging his sword over and over, he finally arrived there, the pinnacle of the sword, saying that it's truly the realm of the supreme god. After that, we get to Okita's side, where we find Heisuke, who looks at Okita, and he says that he is exhausted, that he can barely stand. The others around him is quiet, before Heisuke scratches his head and says that it's useless. Even for a guy like Okita, it's beyond pointless. After that, Kondo tells Heisuke to pay attention. Heisuke with a shaky voice asks what there is to watch, saying that this is too much and calling it hopeless. After that, the other guy takes his hand on his shoulder and smiles, while saying that this is the wish Okita could never fulfill on Earth, a battle where he can give everything as a samurai, telling them that until the very end, they will watch everything. After that, we return to the main guys, as Susanoo says that he was really happy to have been able to fight with Okita. Okita, who's flowing with incense of aura, says that he can say the same thing. After that, we see that everyone watching is glued to the scenery that is about to go down. The text then says that the stance taken by the sword god was the one-hit kill. Sayudan, the top bow. Okita gets ready for what's about to come, and Susanoo finally fires off his attack as a wave is going straight to Okita. Okita watches it closely. However, the attack from Susanoo still hits Okita right in the chest as he spots out an intense amount of blood from his mouth. After that, we get this beautiful panel with both of them. However, Okita is slowly falling to the ground. His eyes are slowly starting to close and fade away as he thinks that Susanoo was insanely strong. He thinks that he can't no longer move his body, but as he gave everything he had, he can finally die as a true samurai. But just as his light is about to go out, he hears all of his comrades and friends screaming his name from the spectating arena. This makes Okita's eye glow again, and he puts his foot on the ground ready to push away. He thinks back to when he was sick and says not yet as he still can fly. After that, he takes his sword and rushes towards Susanoo, who probably thought that this was over. Okita, with an insane bloodlust, is moving at an insane speed as he says that this right here is his final blow. Susanoo is in shock as he wonders how Okita is still able to wield his sword. Okita is quickly closing the distance between them, and the stadium is in awe while watching this go down. However, as Okita is getting closer, he suddenly loses speed, and Susanoo thinks that Okita is no longer able to reach him and tells Okita that this is the end as he is in range for his attack. But as he hears this, Okita's eyes suddenly starts to glow again, which makes Susanoo get a shocked facial expression. Both of them are flowing with an insane aura around them, but Okita uses all of his energy that he has left to close the distance, and then he uses his technique called Tensho, Flight to the Heavens, the 3-stage thrust. And with that technique, he is able to extend his sword and hit Susanoo with 3 clean hits straight to his body. Okita's attack leaves 3 visible holes in Susanoo's body, and he can't even understand what is happening. However, just then, Okita falls down to the ground. The spectators are in the edge of their seats watching this, and the commentator says that Okita's sword strike flew right in Susanoo's body. However, Susanoo gets a smile on himself as he says that even though Okita couldn't fly, he still continued to soar, continuing and saying that to think that he would be able to release that technique at this very moment with a body like that. However, he also admits that he expected nothing less from Okita Souji, the man he admires the most. Tsukuyomi, while watching this, screams at Susanoo to win this already. And just then Susanoo gets ready to go in for the finishing blow. Okita looks up, but sees that something is wrong, as Susanoo's body is starting to wither away. His hands are suddenly dissolving. He looks up and says that he sees, and that he can no longer swing his sword, calling it a bit lonely, with a bittersweet expression on his face. His family is watching this, while having a dark and sad expression on their faces as they see their brother wither away. Okita, who is almost unable to speak, says Susanoo's name, and as he is going away, he cries as he thanks him. After that, the commentator screams that the winner of the 10th round of Ragnarok, the last battle between gods and humans, is humanity's representative, Okita Souji. After that, we only see a broken sword and Okita left on the ground. We also get some fun facts about the match, as we see that it went on for 11 minutes and 25 seconds. The finishing move was the Tensho 3-stage thrust, and the winner was of course Okita Souji. And this, ladies and gentlemen, has been the full Okita vs Susanoo fight explained. Now hopefully you liked this video, as I kind of went crazy when making it, not only because of how insane it was, but also because I got a cramp in my fingers when writing the script. If you like Record of Ragnarok and videos like this, then I would highly suggest you subscribe to this channel, and while you are at it, leave a comment and a like, as it helps out with the algorithm a ton. And if you're curious to see another video of mine, then please watch the video that will be popping up on the screen now. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye.